Today is June 8th, 2021. My name is John Swain, and I'll be conducting this oral history interview with Kristen Smith, the sister of Sergeant David Smith, who was mortally wounded on January 23rd, 2010, while serving as a Marine infantryman in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. This interview is pursuant to the practicum requirements for American military universities' master's degree in public history. It will also be submitted to the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress for the benefit of future generations. Kristen, please state your name and birth date for the record.
I'm Kristen Smith. Birthday is February 16th, 1982.
Where were you born?
I was born in Washington, D.C.
And who are your parents?
My parents, Leonard Smith, Dr. Leonard Smith, and Mary Jane McWilliams.
What were their occupations?
Both worked for Fort Detrick. My mom was in cancer research, the tail end of her career, HVI research, and my dad ended his career. He was the scientific director of USAMRIID.
Who are your siblings?
My one biological sibling was David Smith. I have a half-brother, Daniel Brown, and then I have two stepbrothers and two stepsisters.
Do you have any other family members who are veterans?
The majority of people on my dad's side, so my Uncle Wayne was in Vietnam, and my grandfather served in World War II.
So how was your relationship with your brother David growing up together?
Let me tell you about my best friends. We were exactly 2 years apart. We share the same birthday, and we were inseparable. My parents split when I was 2 and he was an infant, so all of our experiences going back and forth between the two houses, all the vacations. We even shared the same neighborhood friends, so we were very close.
What were some of his interests and hobbies when he was a child and a young man?
He loved sports, loved the Redskins. He was always interested in the military. When we were kids and played, he was always G.I. Joe, saving me from something. He loved soccer, he loved football, he loved lacrosse. He loved music.
Any particular kind of music?
The David before the Marines, he loved old school hip hop, Tupac, Biggie, Nas, Outkast. The David after the Marines, he thought he was a country boy, and so he switched it to country music.
What are some of your fondest memories with David from childhood?
There are just too many. I know at my dad's house, he owns an acre of land, and Dave and I would each get a lawnmower, and we'd mow the lawn together and chase each other on the lawnmower. My mom's house, we had our backyard backed up to a couple other houses, so we would have pickup kickball games, and Dave and I invented a game called swing kickball. I forget the rules. It's been 30 years, but that was a neighborhood favorite. David loved when we were little kids playing that G.I. Joe, and I'd fall down the steps and he'd come rescue me and bring me back up, and that would just be a game. Those were the early memories.
You mentioned that David showed a lot of interest in the military from a young age. Do you remember when he first showed serious, interest in joining?
Yes, I got that phone call. He was supposed to be at senior week after graduation, and he called and he said, Kristen, guess what I just did? I said, what? He said, I just went and swore in to the Marine Corps. Don't tell Mom. And I was like, what? And he had driven back to Baltimore and did the first swearing in and said he'd deal with the repercussions of our parents later.
Do you remember what year that was?
2002.
2002. Do you remember where you were the previous year on September 11th, 2001?
Yes. I had an infant at a 6-week old, and I was dropping him off to his grandmother's so that I could go and work that Tuesday morning. And back then you listened to CDs in the car, and so I had a CD playing, and I walked into work, and this guy came out and said, "The world's coming to an end." And I had no idea what he was talking about. So we went next door and saw everything on television. Because I was at work, I could only watch for a few minutes. And then when I went and picked up my son after work, it was about 5 o'clock that day, and I saw everything. The towers, it just kept replaying on the news, and I just was holding my son, and I couldn't believe that this was happening in a world that I just brought him into.
Did your brother ever say why he wanted to join the Marine Corps? Did he ever mention, anything in particular?
It's the best branch.
Did he specifically want to be in the infantry?
Yes. 0311, I believe, and that's what he wanted to do.
So you mentioned that he told you before he told your parents. When your parents figured out, how did they react to his decision to join the Marine Corps?
They were scared, proud but scared, but there was no changing his mind. This is what he was going to do. So you either supported him or you got out of his way.
What did you think of his decision to join?
I was going to miss him. At that point, I thought boot camp was the worst thing because he'd be gone for 3 months. I remember when we dropped him off for them to take him to Parris Island, one of the guys there had mentioned that he had put on a couple pounds and they would take care of that in boot camp. And I remember raging, don't talk to my little brother like this. And Mom said, "Kristen, he's going to get it if you don't keep your mouth closed." So, yeah.
So how old were you when he left for boot camp?
I don't remember.
What were you doing at the time? For work or just in your life?
Well, I was raising my son. I was in the restaurant industry at that time, and I was also, I work in the theater and dance, so I was teaching dance and choreographing for shows at that time. It was very busy.
Do you remember before he left if you all had a party or, some kind of sending off for him?
Family got together, family and friends at my mom's house for the send-off. Just small, but the most intimate people, the right people were there.
Did you correspond with David while he was in boot camp?
Through letters. Yep, I got a letter every few weeks from him.
Do you remember going down to Parris Island to his graduation ceremony?
Yes, that was an amazing event. We couldn't pick him out of a crowd because he was so tiny. But when all the guys came out, I remember that song, Proud to Be an American, was playing. And then as soon as that song ended, they all started singing the Marine Corps song, screaming at the top of their lungs. And then after he was released so he could show the family Parris Island, his voice was so raspy he couldn't even talk. But he brought us around, and I remember there were so many flies and gnats that day, and they would just, fly by him, and I'd be like, "David, this isn't bothering you?" And he would say, "You can't move. You can't move." So I remember that.
You mentioned, his voice being raspy. Was there anything else that changed about him that you noticed?
Just, he didn't have his curls anymore. Dave had an afro full of curls before the Marines, and this was high and tight, and he was just all muscle. He stood taller, prouder, and that voice, it was deeper and just so raspy.
So David checked into Bravo Company, 4th Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion after his initial training. Did you know any of his friends when he was with the unit? Did you get to meet any of them?
Well, he joined the Marines under the buddy program with Brandon Skaggs, so I knew him. He was a childhood friend of David's. I only met other Marines after, or the buildup of the first deployment.
Did your brother enjoy being a Marine?
He loved it.
In 2006, Bravo Company deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. They would be conducting riverine operations in Ramadi and Haditha during some of the most dangerous years of the war. Tell me a little about your life, circa 2006.
Um, I think that was probably the best years of my life. I lived downtown, still working in the industry, the food industry. That nightlife. The one thing that Dave and I had in common we both grew up was that we both loved to dance. So he and a couple of the Marines and my friends would always get together at a place called the Raw Bar every Saturday night, and we would just dance and dance and dance. And Dave was one of the best dancers I've ever known, and he was again raising my son at the time, and he and David were very, very close. So,
When did David first tell you that he'd be going to Iraq?
I think when the unit was put in the bubble, he let the family know that he would be leaving.
And how'd you feel?
Oh, terrified. Praying, bartering, anything, my own life, that they didn't have to go.
What'd you think about the war in Iraq at the time?
Um, I am not a fan of war. I'm not a fan of. I know there's a lot going on in the world that I don't understand. I just knew that my brother felt that he needed to go, and he felt very strongly about it. And at the end of the day, I just needed to support that.
Do you remember saying goodbye to him when he left for Iraq?
Yes, it was at my mom's house. And honestly, it wasn't that bad of a goodbye. He was so excited, and he had so much training at Camp Lejeune. I mean, months of training, and they were training on he was considered a river rat. They were on the boats, and just he felt ready to go, and I couldn't rain on his parade because, you know.
So what were your feelings while David was in Iraq?
So I put together a fundraiser for the boys. I wanted all of them to have a care package to open on Thanksgiving. We called it Thanks for Giving, and I just asked for local businesses help and that type of thing, and it blew up. We were getting money from people in California, and we had so much money that I ended up starting buying like DS's and games to put in their care package. And David was so appreciative of it, but he said, Kristen, the majority of the things that you sent all of us, we then gave to the Iraqi people. He said there were a lot of women and children that were in need, and his letters home would depict humanitarian missions, and that he was helping build schools, and he was building homes, and it was more, like I said, humanitarian than actual firefights. And so I felt very confident about him being there. I knew him and the boys were making a huge change.
Do you remember any conversations you had with him? Letters, emails, phone calls?
He couldn't make very many phone calls. So there were a lot of letters. I know I missed a call on Christmas Day from him. That was a tough pill to swallow. He would just write about pretty much what the children that, felt confident running up to the Marines. And the one time he did write home, they were on the river, and they had been attacked. And one of the commanding Marines wanted to jump in the water and try to bring the boat to shore. And David asked to go with them, and the Marine finally said yes. And he said, "Get a rope, David." Well, David was supposed to hold on to one end of the rope, and he was supposed to throw the other end to the other Marine. And David just throws both ends of the rope. And David said, Mom and Kristen, I'm going to tell you this story, but don't repeat it because it's what Marines are supposed to do. But in the Euphrates River, there are a lot of trenches and currents, and this Marine that he was with stepped off and fell into one of the trenches. And Dave swam over to him and picked him up, and when the boat finally paddled over to them and grabbed David by the back, he had never let go of the Marine. And he was so proud of that story.
Did you keep in touch with some of the other families of the other Bravo Company service members while they were in Iraq?
Absolutely. Flair, which is outside of Fort Detrick, they had a lot of, like almost every month, the wives, the mothers, the family members would get together and we'd make coming home posters or just different events so that we all could know each other.
When did David return home? Do you remember?
I don't remember the month, but I remember that we all went down to North Carolina to see them off the bus.
How'd you welcome him?
So we had my son and my dad were there, and we had made posters for him, and we were sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting on the sidewalk. I mean, for hours for their buses to come, and this news reporter came over to me, and she said, are you welcoming a family member home? I said, yes. And she said, can we follow you? Can we follow your story? And I said, absolutely. So I was truly blessed because this woman followed us up until that third bus came. He was on the third bus. And she got the whole thing on video. And as soon as we saw him, ran up, gave him a huge hug. And so that was awesome. That was awesome.
How do you seem to readjust to coming home, to civilian life?
I don't think he really had a hard time. Again, his Iraqi experience was more of the positive experience from what he said. I know his bond with the other Marines was incredibly strong. I mean, they were inseparable. But he didn't seem to have a hard time readjusting.
Did he talk about the deployment much?
All the time. Yep. All the stories that I've already said, but just him and the boys, and I see the Marines, and yeah, he actually really enjoyed being there. He really enjoyed it.
Let's talk a little more about your family around this time. Did you have any family traditions?
Just your normal holidays.
You mentioned a little bit about some of the things you and your brother did together. Dancing, or did you have any other hobbies you shared? Particularly in this time, after Iraq. He was pretty close with your children too, right?
He was my son at the time. David was also going to school at ECU, so when he got back, he went back to school. So I only saw him on the one weekend a month that he would come up for training.
So when he wasn't training with Bravo Company, how did he spend his time? You mentioned he's going to school. Do you have any other hobbies at the time?
Well, like I said, he was at ECU, and Kimberly, his girlfriend at the time, she was really big into horses. So she actually taught him how to ride horses, hence the country music and the cowboy hat. That all came in around that time. He had a great group of friends in ECU.
What do you think some of David's life goals were at this point?
Oh, Marine. He was going to be a Marine. Whether active duty or say a reservist, that's what he was going to do.
In 2009, Bravo Company received word that they'd once again be deploying, this time to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. What was your life like in early 2009? Were you working? Were you in school? Your children?
I was working. I'd had my daughter at this point. She was 1 at this time. So busy with 2 kids, same jobs as I mentioned earlier before.
Do you remember when David told you about the 2009 deployment?
I remember when he said it was going to happen. I feel like they had set a date and then it got backed up a little bit because I remember he just wanted to go.
What did you think about the war in Afghanistan?
I hated the thought of my brother having to go back to war.
Did you feel differently about him going to Afghanistan versus Iraq, or was it kind of the same?
I felt differently, only because David was different. He wasn't as excited about this deployment. Everything just felt different. Leading up to it, up until the day he left, it just didn't feel right.
Do you know if David had a choice of whether or not he had to go?
I can't confirm. I don't know. I know he was going to go.
Did he ever tell you how he felt about going back, or was it just kind of something you picked up
on? The day before he left, in contrast to the Iraqi deployment, David was very sad. He was very moody, leaving for Afghanistan. I remember when he was packing, I kind of just laid on his bed, and he just was not in a good place, and he felt that he was not ready to go. His training hadn't prepared him for what he was going to experience in Afghanistan. And I remember David was not much of a crier, but saying goodbye to my mom, he cried really hard.
How did your parents react to him going back overseas?
Not good.
So, do you remember when he left? How'd you send him off?
Yeah, like I said, I was in his room. He was packing, and he had this book, this Dan Brown book that he kind of threw in his suitcase. I forget which one it was. And I said, Dave, I'm going to get this book. And I said, well, I'll read it while you're gone, and when you get back, we'll discuss it. And he was like, okay. And I remember, it was when it was time for me to go, and I got up and gave him a hug and told him I loved him, and he hugged me back, and he said, I'll talk to you soon.
Were you able to keep in touch with him while he was deployed?
Yes, not as much as Iraq. We got some letters from him. He was at a place called The Farm. He talked about wanting to build some shelves while he was there. He talked about the countryside while he was there. He talked about it really being, there wasn't much going on. There was a lot of animals on the property that they were taking care of, but other than that, there was nothing.
Did you send care packages here like you did in Iraq?
Christmas in Afghanistan, same deal. We sent a care package to every single Marine in the unit.
Did you have, a lot of contact with the other family members of the Bravo Company Marines while they were in Afghanistan, like you did in Iraq?
Yes, and because a lot of them were the same families from Iraq, we had known each other. So yes, we did.
Do you remember the last time you spoke with David before he was injured?
We did not. The last time I spoke with him was before he left. We were never able to speak on the phone again.
In January of 2010, Bravo Company conducted a raid of a Taliban stronghold in the Zarandakale Bazaar in Tagaz, Helmand Province. After clearing the bazaar of enemy combatants, the Marines began conducting security operations in the area. On January 23rd, Bravo Company's 3rd Platoon was struck by a dismounted suicide bomber who inflicted mass casualties on the Marines. 2 men were killed and several more were wounded. David was among those seriously injured. When and how did you first hear that David was wounded?
It was a Saturday around noon, around noon, and my stepfather called me, and he said that my mom needed to talk to me. And I made some joke about why didn't she just call me herself, and I got on the phone, and her voice, I could just tell something was very, very wrong. And she said that David in the unit had been hit, and that's all that they knew at that point in time. We were still getting intel. It had apparently just happened. Our biggest fear was that David had caught shrapnel to the face, and that he would have scars on his face, or worst case scenario, he'd be confined to a wheelchair.
What did they tell you about his condition in the coming days?
Not much. We did not get a lot of information at all. Everything seemed pretty positive. Like he was going to come out of it. It was going to be minor injuries. We didn't know how bad it was until the Marines flew my parents to Germany.
And were you able to be with David when he passed away?
I was 7 months pregnant with my third, and I did not get the okay to fly to Germany. So my mom and my dad went together.
This was a very difficult time for you and your family. Who were some of the people who supported you during this time?
Everybody.
David was laid to rest at Site 8974, Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery, surrounded by thousands of fellow service members who gave the last full measure of devotion. Do you remember David's memorial service? Did anyone speak? Do you remember anything they said?
Yes. A Marine that was with him in Iraq gave a beautiful eulogy. It sticks with me to this day. My brother Daniel read a poem. My mom spoke. I sang Amazing Grace.
How did you and your family support each other in the coming weeks?
Well, true to David's form, the week of his funeral, there was Snowmageddon. It was a huge snowstorm. In fact, it was snowing so hard during his memorial in Arlington, so it confined us all to the house because it was nearly impossible to drive anywhere. So we all were with each other. Everyone had brought so much food. We had every photo album open, and old VHS tapes were hooked up. Phone calls. We did the best we could.
Were you in contact with the Gold Star families of the other Bravo Company service members who died on the 23rd?
My mom stayed in contact with the other families.
Did you feel that David's country was grateful for his sacrifice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger flew the flag of California, or in California at half-mast for the three that had perished because their training was in Pendleton. And the memorial service in Arlington was just, remember the snow was so high, and after the 21 gun salute, the servicemen dug in the snow trying to find the to give to my family. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere downtown Frederick where people didn't put on their outside signs, things about David, because everyone loved him downtown. There have been the schools he went to all had memorials for him. Frederick High School had memorials. Fort Detrick had memorial. And we have a fundraiser every year, a golf tournament in his name that has been going strong for 11 years now. And the people that come and support it, I mean, we raise, I think last year was $30,000 that we just give back into the community in David's name. And yeah.
So as you mentioned, at the time of this interview, it's been over 11 years since David passed away. What have you done to seek healing after the loss of your brother?
Every year is a new goal. A lot of reading, a lot of communicating with people that have gone through this kind of grief. Honestly, the thing that probably pulls me into my core the most, but does the most help, is talking to his fellow Marine brothers. And every person I talk to gives a different account of that day. And it just, keeping his memory alive. His high school friends, we have one day out of the year that we all get together in honor of him. And every year we get together, there's new stories of him that magically come up, and, you know, reading old letters, looking at old pictures, just time. You know, after that first year, people said, you know, it'll never be okay, but one day you'll be able to live through it. I never believed them, but it's true. Time does heal all.
How do you honor your brother's memory?
My youngest is named after him. I had her 4 months after David was born, or David died. She was born. Sempra is her name for the Marine Corps motto, which is Semper Fidelis, and her middle name is James. He was David James, so her name means always David. We go to Arlington Cemetery a few times a year. I make sure my kids, they hear about him every single day. They know about his legacy. There are pictures up everywhere of him. Talking about him, you know, when I'm with clients, telling them his story. I do what I can. And the fundraiser, the golf tournament also.
What are some of your favorite memories of your brother? Some maybe that you haven't mentioned yet.
David and I, he was my favorite person to call. Anything funny happened, even when he was in North Carolina, I gotta tell my brother this. Or one of our parents, you know, made me mad. I gotta call David and tell him about this. And I love watching him with my kids, especially my son. They were really, really close. When David would come home from ECU, the wrestling matches between he and my son would just knock over furniture. I loved hearing his stories about Iraq. I loved, especially when they were in Kuwait, just some of the stories that he came home and told.
What are some things that you'd like everyone to know about David's life and his character?
David was that guy that just did everything right. He had the best moral compass. He would fight for he would fight for the weaker person or the underdog. He would support you. He would stay on the phone with you for hours to talk you through anything. He was a family man. Possibly the funniest person I've ever met in my life. He was just one of those people that should have had another 80 years to continue to make the world a better place, because every person that came into his life became a better person because of him.
Is there anything you'd like to say to other people who have suffered the loss of a loved one in a war?
I'm there with you, and thank you for your service and for your loved one's sacrifice. And we are all connected, and time heals. It does heal. And they're still there, just in different form. But listen for those signs, those miracles, because they're still there.
Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about the life of your brother, Sergeant David Smith. As you know, pending your final approval, this interview will be submitted to the Library of Congress for the benefit of future generations. It's possible that your descendants will watch this interview in the future. Is there anything that you'd like to say to them?
Your uncle, your great uncle, your great great uncle, he was an amazing man, and he will forever live within you. And learn from him and be like him.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Thank you.